Adonais, or as he is more commonly known as, the Soul King, is the most important figure within the cosmology of Bleach. The Soul King's existence maintains the delicate balance between the Soul Society, Hueco Mundo, and the world of the living, as he essentially holds together all of reality. Yet for someone so pivotal to the universe of Bleach, determining his actual power level presents somewhat of a challenge. Unlike the other powerhouses who get epic battle sequences to showcase their various different techniques and abilities, the Soul King, on the other hand, has never been seen within an actual battle. And the version of him that we are introduced to is a silent, sealed figure who is more of a plot device rather than an active participant in the story. It's no exaggeration to describe him as a being who is neither alive or fully dead. This does not mean that we don't have glimpses of his power. Via the fragments of the Soul King as well as his scattered body parts, we begin to understand just how much of a powerful being he is. Then you have characters as powerful as Aizen and Yhwach who speak of the Soul King and the power that is required to even challenge the Soul King in his sealed state, and what catastrophic events could occur if the Soul King's power is disrupted. Thinking about the strength of the Soul King becomes even more fascinating when we consider that the version that we see of him in the main story is him at his weakest, as he has been sealed, dismembered, and stripped of his agency, robbing him of any autonomy. Despite this severely weakened state, the Soul King is still able to prevent the collapse of reality by exerting what power he has left in order to maintain balance between the realms. Now, because of this insane feat, it has left me to wonder just how powerful was the Soul King at his peak. In this video, I'll be breaking down everything that we know about the capabilities of the Soul King, as I'll be looking at everything from explicit statements to subtle implications as I piece together just how strong this godlike being truly is. I'll be examining the original powers of the Soul King and his role in shaping reality and how he compares to other top tier characters within Bleach. So without further delay, here is my video analyzing just how strong the Soul King is. Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. While most Bleach characters prove themselves by demonstrating their abilities within direct combat, the Soul King's power manifests in more subtle cosmic ways. This does make it hard to use traditional power scaling in order to gauge just how strong the Soul King is, so for this reason we do need to look a bit deeper than the surface. Throughout this video, we'll examine 5 key aspects that paint a picture of the Soul King's true capabilities. We'll first explore his role as a linchpin of reality, not just maintaining the separation between the worlds, but someone who actively prevents the collapse of reality through his mere existence. This sheer cosmic scale passive ability already puts him in a category beyond typical power measurements. Secondly, we'll be diving into the Soul King's original abilities, in particular his perfected version of the Almighty. While Yhwach's version with 3 irises could see and alter the future, the Soul King's version with 4 irises was even more advanced than this. This does imply that he has a level of temporal and causal manipulation which exceeds even that which we had seen from Yhwach, who had demonstrated that he has the power to even rewrite his own death by altering the future. The third aspect we'll be looking at is the raw power output of the Soul King. When Yhwach had absorbed the Soul King during the 1000-year Blood War arc, the overflow of power was so immense that it manifested as an army of black entities that even multiple captains couldn't handle. This does give us somewhat of a tangible measure of just how vast the Soul King's power reserves were, even in his sealed state. The fourth aspect that we'll examine is the Soul King's dismembered body parts, with each body part becoming a sentient, incredibly powerful being in their own right. From Mimihagi's powers of stagnation to Gerard's miraculous abilities, these body parts of the Soul King demonstrate how even pieces of him possessed god tier capabilities. And the fifth and final area that I'll be looking at is comparing the Soul King to other top tier characters in Bleach, by examining how characters like Aizen, Yhwach, and Ichigo measure up against the different aspects of the Soul King's power. We can start to better contextualize the true strength of the Soul King. Hopefully with this approach, this video is going to help you to better understand why the Soul King isn't just another powerful entity, but rather he is a being whose strength transcends conventional power scaling. baffling. The existence of the Soul King in his current state presents us with an interesting paradox. While he is an entity who is so fundamentally powerful that his mere existence prevents the three realms from collapsing, he is also the ultimate prisoner who is sealed away and dismembered in a crystal prison. In order to understand his true strength, we need to examine this duality that exists with this character. Before the Soul King was imprisoned, he had existed as a primordial being of unfathomable power. Before he split the world into the Soul Society, Yhwach, and the world of the living, the original Soul King existed in an era where reality itself was unstable, and hollows had threatened to consume everything. It was as if fate or destiny had emerged in order to create a natural counterforce to the hollows, which had led to the birth of the Soul King. The Soul King wasn't just a powerful Shinigami or an enhanced being, we're talking about an entity which could reshape the very fabric of existence through his sheer will. During the primordial world, he proved that he was the only being capable of single-handedly keeping the chaotic forces of the hollows in check, maintaining a delicate balance in the primordial world, which was under a constant threat of collapse. The limitless power of the Soul King had made him an easy target, as the ancestors of the five great noble families had seen the Soul King's unrestricted ability to alter reality as a threat. Now just think about this for a second. These individuals, who also existed within the primordial world, were so terrified of the Soul King's power that they conspired to seal away the very being protecting their world. It wasn't enough to just imprison him though, they systematically dismembered him, removing his limbs, his heart, and various other organs. This was primarily because of the ancestor of the Tsuneyashiro family, who was afraid that the Soul King would possibly break free of his imprisonment, which is why he proposed the idea to dismember the Soul King in order to weaken him. Each piece of the Soul King was deemed powerful enough to potentially destroy their new world order if it was left with the Soul King, which is why he was dismembered. What makes this entire premise even more interesting is that the Soul King, despite possessing power which could have easily prevented this fate, had allowed it to happen. And with him being in possession of an advanced version of the Almighty, the Soul King had known what fate was about to befall him, but he did not resist it. According to Ichigo, the Soul King's mere existence could have destroyed their world, as his power was so vast that reality itself bent around him. Yet he submitted to imprisonment, suggesting that the Soul King foresaw something that made this sacrifice necessary. Now the Soul King exists in a state of perpetual limbo, as he is neither alive or dead. He is suspended within a crystal structure at the top of the royal palace, as he maintains the barriers between the worlds, not through active power, but through his very essence, as the Soul King prevents the three realms from merging back into the original chaotic primordial state. The Soul King, even in this sealed state, had power which was so immense that when Yhwach later absorbed him, he couldn't fully contain it. This excess power manifested as an army of dark creatures which overwhelmed multiple captain-level Shinigami. If this was just an overflow of his sealed power, just imagine what he could do at his full strength with all of his limbs and organs intact. The Soul King represents a level of power which is so vast that the entire Bleach cosmology had to be restructured in order to contain it. Let's turn our attention towards the abilities of the Soul King as we begin with his most fascinating power, the Almighty. While Yhwach's version had let him see and alter possible futures, the Soul King possessed what appears to be a perfect form of the Almighty. This is evidenced by his eyes having 4 pupils, compared to Yhwach's 3 pupils after his powers were fully awakened. But what does this extra pupil signify? It suggests that the Soul King didn't just see possible futures, he was able to perceive time itself as a flat circle, viewing past, present, and future all at the same time. Think about this level of perception for just a moment. While Yhwach could see grains of possible futures, the Soul King existed in a state of complete temporal awareness. This perfect Almighty transcended even Yhwach's ability to manipulate fate. We see evidence of this through Mimihagi, his right arm, which could act completely outside of Yhwach's future sight. If a mere fragment of the Soul King could bypass the Almighty, imagine the capabilities of the Soul King as a complete being. But the Almighty was just one aspect of his power. The Soul King demonstrated reality manipulation on a scale that makes Aizen's complete hypnosis look like a circus trick. He didn't just alter alter perception, he fundamentally reshaped the fabric of existence. The separation of reality into 3 realms wasn't achieved through some elaborate high-level Kido spell or a Zanpakuto technique. The Soul King literally took one chaotic primordial world and divided it into 3 distinctive planes of existence, each with its own laws of physics and spiritual energy. And there is evidence to suggest that the 3 realms of the world of the living, Hueco and the Soul Society are universal in scale. If you do want to learn more about this, then I have a video on the entire cosmology of Bleach, which you should definitely check out after this one. The best way to measure the raw power output of the Soul King is again to bring up this example when Yhwach had absorbed the powers of the Soul King. He was unable to even contain all of this power despite being one of the strongest beings in existence. Those dark creatures which manifested as a result of this excess power were so dense that the captains couldn't harm them, and it was only Aizen with his own transcendent level of spiritual pressure who had the power to crush these beings who were the representation of the excess power of the Soul King. In terms of spiritual pressure, the Soul King's Reiatsu operated on a different paradigm in comparison to other characters. Most beings in Bleach exert spiritual pressure actively, but the Soul King's existence warped reality around him. This wasn't just massive amounts of spiritual pressure, it was power that was so fundamental that it became a natural law of the universe. I would even say that you would need to be a transcendent being on the level of Dangai Ichigo or even Hokyoku infused Aizen in order to fully fathom just how powerful the Soul King is. The Soul King has an interesting relationship with time and mortality. The Soul King in his original form was immortal, as the primordial world of Bleach did not have a concept of death. Even in his imprisoned state, his existence is beyond conventional life and death. Through his split body parts and fragments, his consciousness spans through all of time, with his body parts able to manipulate the very concept of death itself, as Mimihagi with its powers of stagnation is able to halt degradation and stop illnesses from progressing indefinitely, while Gerard's heart that he had inherited from the Soul King is able to transform despair into power, as he can convert all of the wounds that he sustains into an increase of his size and strength via his ability called the Miracle. The powers of the Soul King that we witness are through fragmented pieces of his power, which you could assume are limited expressions of his full power. These body parts of the Soul King were nearly impossible for some of the top tier characters in Bleach to handle, which suggests that the true strength of these body parts, if they were attached to the original Soul King, would elevate his power to an entirely different category where it would truly dwarf the capabilities of the strongest Bleach characters. I want to now go into a bit more detail about the dismembered body parts of the Soul King. Take for example Gerard Valkyrie, the physical manifestation of the Soul King's heart. His Shrift ability, the Miracle, demonstrates a fundamental aspect of the powers of the Soul King, the ability to rewrite the rules of life and death itself. Gerard didn't just regenerate from damage, he was able to weaponize the concept of despair itself, as he had grown stronger with each defeat and wound that he had sustained. Multiple captains had to work together, and even then they couldn't permanently put him down. Even Kenpachi Zaraki, the Soul Society's strongest Shinigami, had found that his overwhelming strength even in his Bankai state wasn't enough to put down Gerard. Gerard was only defeated because of the intervention of Yhwach, who had casted Ashvalan, as he had stolen the powers of Gerard that he had received from the heart of the Soul King. Then we have Pernida, the left arm of the Soul King, whose evolution-based powers had painted a very fascinating picture of the Soul King's adaptive capabilities. Pernida was able to instantly analyze and replicate any ability that it had encountered, while simultaneously evolving beyond it. By using its nerves, it was able to infiltrate the body of its opponents and thus learn from them and evolve even further. Even Mayuri, the mad scientist of the Soul Society, had nearly met his end trying to counter Pernida's powers. Mayuri only secured victory after he had turned Pernida's own endless evolution against itself. Now, the most telling example of the Soul King's power is definitely Mimihagi, the right arm of the Soul King. Its power over stagnation results in its ability to halt any change, including death itself, as it's also able to stop the progression of illness. Mimihagi is the counter to Pernida, as it represents another fundamental aspect of the Soul King's authority over reality. The interesting thing about both Mimihagi and Pernida is that they were both able to operate outside of Yhwach's Almighty. Remember, the Almighty was supposed to let Yhwach see and alter all possible futures. Yet Mimihagi and Pernida's actions had remained invisible to Yhwach. This suggests that the Soul King's power existed on a level that transcended even fate itself. Each fragment of the Soul King represented a fundamental aspect of reality. The heart governed over miracles and resurrection, the left arm controlled evolution and progress, the right arm managed stagnation and preservation, and then you have the different fragments of the Soul King which were within the bodies of the Fullbringers. And as you know, each Fullbringer manifests a unique ability of their own, which you could easily link back to the Soul King and his influence. With a lot of the techniques and abilities that are inherited from fragments and pieces of the Soul King, they are not just combat-centric powers. These are techniques and abilities that govern over the basic functions of reality. So you can now see that if the individual pieces of the Soul King could fight on par with some of the strongest characters in Bleach, then surely you must be convinced that his complete power would dwarf anything that we've seen in the series thus far. To convince you even further, I want to compare the capabilities of the Soul King with some of the biggest powerhouses in the series. Let's begin with a direct comparison to Yhwach. Despite Yhwach being the son of the Soul King and wielding his own version of the Almighty, Yhwach struggled to contain all of the Soul King's power. Even when he arrived at the royal palace, Yhwach had to rely upon the powers of Ichigo in order to break the seal of the Soul King, something which he was incapable of doing. The fact that he had to resort to specific tactics and timing just to overcome a sealed, dismembered version of the Soul King suggests that a full-powered, complete Soul King would have far surpassed even Yhwach's godlike capabilities. Let's see how Aizen compares. Throughout his journey to transcend the limitations of a Shinigami and a Hollow, Aizen recognized that truly surpassing the gods meant dealing with the Soul King. Aizen desired to overthrow the Soul King and sit on top of the heavens as the true ruler of reality. For the most part, his research and preparation centered around finding a way to enter the royal palace and to gain power via the Hokyoku so that he could match the cosmic level of power of the Soul King. Even then, when you consider that the Hokyoku was made up of fragments of the Soul King, even Aizen had to rely upon the powers of the Soul King in order to become transcendent. After he had merged with the Hokyoku, he gained an incredible amount of spiritual pressure, as he had demonstrated during the 1000-year Blood War arc, as he was able to use this spiritual pressure to destroy those black creatures which were raining down from the royal palace, a feat that the captains within the Soul Society were unable to accomplish. So while yes, Aizen has enough power at least to deal with the overflow of the Soul King's power, I believe that if he were to face off against the completed version of the Soul King, it would pose a massive hurdle for him to overcome. As long as Aizen's resolve to defeat the Soul King remains intact, the Hokyoku will align itself with this resolve and thus evolve Aizen further and further until he is able to challenge the Soul King on an equal footing. But God knows however many increments of evolution are required to get to that point. And whether if Aizen's resolve will falter like it did against Ichigo, which had then resulted in the Hokyoku weakening Aizen. Then when you look at the case of Ichigo, it adds another layer to this power scaling discussion, because at the end of Bleach, Ichigo's true Bankai form possessed enough strength to contend with the Soul King empowered Yhwach. However, we should note that this was Ichigo fighting against someone wielding an absorbed and processed version of the Soul King's power, not the raw original power of the Soul King. Even to defeat this unrefined version of the Soul King's power, Ichigo needed to develop a perfect harmony of its Hollow, Fullbringer, Quincy and Shinigami powers, thus essentially mirroring the nature of the Soul King, a huge feat which had allowed Ichigo to overcome Yhwach, who was strengthened by the powers of a sealed Soul King. It's evident that the Soul King possessed so much power that he could have easily prevented his imprisonment, but for one reason or another that we don't know of, he had allowed himself to be sealed and dismembered. I believe that the Soul King had used his advanced version of the Almighty to decide that his imprisonment was necessary. The most obvious and impressive feat of the Soul King is that he is able to maintain universal stability even in this severely handicapped state. From everything that we've discussed in this video, it's evident that every single powerful character in Bleach who possesses unreal amounts of spiritual pressure or has a very broken ability, they each owe a lot of their success to the Soul King, as most of this power was derived from the body parts or fragments and pieces of the Soul King. These are parts of the Soul King that exist within the reincarnation cycle of Bleach, and as of making this video we are only aware of the right and left arm of the Soul King as well as the heart of the Soul King. I do wonder if the Bleach manga continues via the Hell arc, it will be introduced to other body parts of the Soul King, and some fans have even speculated that Gremmy's brain was possibly the brain of the Soul King. But again, there's no confirmation of this aside from some speculation within the Can't Be Unworld light novels. One of the best ways that you can compare the Soul King to some of the stronger characters in Bleach is when you look at what both Yhwach and Aizen were trying to achieve. They both fundamentally wanted to alter reality, and this was a feat that the Soul King was able to naturally do. Their most ambitious aims were essentially attempting to match what the Soul King was able to passively achieve even in his sealed state. So yeah, Yhwach and Aizen, even at their strongest, don't hold a candle against the peak powers of the Soul King in his unsealed state. So for a multitude of different reasons that I've explained with this video, I believe that the Soul King is truly the strongest being within Bleach. Despite having gone over a lot of stuff within this video, there is one question which remains unanswered. How would the Soul King have fought if he was given a chance to? His scattered body parts demonstrated overwhelming abilities, but we have yet to see the unsealed version of the Soul King take part in a battle. I do think that within Core 4 of the Bleach 1000 Year Blood War arc anime, we may get an extended flashback featuring the emergence of the Soul King during the Primordial world. So we may get to see a brief glimpse of his power, which he had exerted in order to stop the Hollows from wreaking havoc upon the Primordial world. All of this occurred before the Soul King split reality into the three realms, and via some brief flashbacks that we got within Core 3, we did actually get to see a brief glimpse of the Soul King doing this. So I do hope that the final core of the anime gives us a complete flashback, as we've been teased with a lot of glimpses across Cores 1 to 3. If this were to happen, it would really help us to see the Soul King in a different light. As of making this video, we haven't seen his potential as a warrior, just glimpses of his power in others through the remnants that he has shared via his body parts and fragments. So we have now reached the point of the video where I want to hand over the discussion to all of you. Was the Soul King truly the strongest in Bleach, or is his reputation exaggerated due to his passive role within the story? I'd love to know all of your thoughts about the true strength of the Soul King, so definitely continue the discussion in the comments. If there's anything that I've forgotten to mention about the powers of the Soul King, then let me know. And lastly, thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video.
A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more. Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.